Hey everyone, so I wanted to just give you a brief tutorial on how to read a z-table to find a p-value. So what's going on here is that at this point in a problem, we have already calculated a z-test statistic. So whatever we get for that z-test statistic is going to compile on the column on the left side over here of the table, and then on the row right here on the top part of the table. And what's going on is that these first two decimal points represented by the up and down arrow, that's actually going to be the first two numbers of your z-test statistic, whereas the row kind of going across the top of the table is going to represent the third number in your z-test statistic or your hundredths place. So for example, let's say that we had a negative 2.53 z-test statistic. So the way I'm going to read that is that on my column right here, I see I have negative 2.5 right there. So those are just the first two numbers of my 2.53. So what's going on is we have negative 2.53, and you can see I circled that 0.03 right there because that 3 is just representing the final number in my calculated z-test statistic. So it's really just as simple as finding your negative 2.5, combine it with the 3, sort of go over until you meet right in the middle where both of them are, and that's going to be your p-value right there. So one thing I want to point out is that when you're given this z-table right here, you can see that at the very top, all we have is a one-tailed consideration. You see it's not talking about two tails right there. We don't have that. So here it is a one-tailed consideration, and so if we're given a problem where it's a one-tailed test, what we find for our p-value in this chart is going to be your p-value because the information we're provided based on the chart is one-tailed information. However, if it's a two-tailed test, and you know that because when you set up your hypothesis, it's going to say equal to a certain number, not equal to a certain number, and just that the nature of the problem itself is two-tailed, that means that the information you get from here is one-tailed, so you actually need to multiply whatever you get for your p-value in this chart right here by 2 to get the p-value for your two-tailed test. The very last thing I want to point out about reading this chart is that oftentimes you're going to see a negative chart like this. You see every single z-test statistic listed on this chart is a negative number. But sometimes you're going to get the chart where you actually have everything as positive. So really the only difference between the two is that at least as far as reading your p-value is concerned, is that the positive z-tables make you do one extra step in that whatever you find for your p-value in the middle of this table right here. So you use your z, the first two numbers of it, the last number of it using the column and the rows like we just discussed, and then you find your associated p-value in the middle of the chart. Well, you need to take 1 minus that number for it to give you your p-value. So let me demonstrate this real quick. So for example, on the positive table, let's say my z-value was 1.50. So I'd look for it, now I'd go, okay, well we have 1.5 right here, and then right here is going to be the 0, so you can just see where it meets is going to be this 0.9332. So on the positive table, we get 0.9332. And let's look for that same 1.50 on the negative table. So when I look for 1.50 on the negative table, you can see I'm just going to go at the negative 1.5, and then we know that that first column right there is the 0, so our answer right here is going to be 0.668. So assuming this is a one-tailed test, because like we just discussed, if it's two-tailed, you're going to want to multiply it by 2, but apart from that, you can see that the 0.0668 we get on the negative table, if you combine that with the value you got on the positive table, they would both equal to 1, or 100%. So essentially what you find using the positive z-table is simply the complement of the p-value that you find on the negative table. So long story short, if you're trying to find the p-value for a certain test statistic, all you need to do is look at the negative table. Even if when you calculate your test statistic, it gives you a positive value, you might be inclined to look towards the positive z-table and find its p-value, but then you just have to subtract it from 1. So essentially, if you can just take your z-test statistic, make it negative, then look on the negative table, what you find on that negative table is your p-value. Unless it's two-tailed, then you have to multiply it by 2. So that's just a very brief overview on how to actually read the table itself. So thank you for watching, and I hope that helped out.